Welcome to the Global Missions Podcast, a show for Christ followers who want to participate more effectively in God's work, both at home and to the ends of the earth. This episode is brought to you by the Global Missions Toolbox, a new collection of trusted resources to help clarify and strengthen your participation in global missions. Visit us online at globalmissionstoolbox.com. And now, here's your host, Rob Magwood, better known to many friends as Mags.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Global Missions Podcast episode. We will be exploring what it means for Christ followers to rest in God's love. We're going to hear from a spiritual care facilitator about some of the common questions he hears from mission workers about their spiritual vitality and why he believes it's essential that they and all Christ followers learn to rest in the love of God. Our guest today is Mike Bowden, a spiritual care facilitator with TEAM, the Evangelical Alliance Mission. Mike works to provide soul care for mission workers from around the world. He received his training in the Chicago area from Moody Bible Institute and North Park Seminary and served himself 17 years as a mission worker in the Czech Republic. With his wife Sonia and 2 daughters, he returned to live in the United States in 2012. Mike, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be here.
Help us get going just by explaining a bit about your experience in caring for mission workers who are serving around the world.
Yeah, well, Mags, it comes out of, I think, my own experience of being a church planner and seeing how, as mission workers, we can kind of get good at ministry and yet kind of maybe lose or not care, not cultivate that heart relationship with the Lord. And so as I saw that in my own life, I developed more and more of a concern or burden calling to be able to do that for mission workers. And so that's what I do now with TEAM. I serve TEAM as well as other mission agencies or mission workers. And meet with them on Skype, just listening, talking, caring. And then I travel around the world quite a bit, meeting and leading spiritual retreats.
Wonderful. Well, we can hear already that this emerges out of your personal experience, and you've had additional opportunity broadly. I'm looking forward to this conversation. In talking with Mike before we pressed record, just his caring heart toward God's servants. So, Mike, let's jump right into some of the things that motivate all this. Why are we doing this? What are some of the common concerns that you've heard from mission workers as you have talked with them?
Like I said, I've met with a lot of men and some women. And, as I sit and I listen and in that place of soul care, there's 2 things that I hear almost across the board. When offered that safe place, I hear, and these are missionaries that have been on the field for 10, 20 years and have their MDivs or their doctorates. The 2 things I often hear is, what is prayer really? Beyond the list, beyond intercession, what does it mean just to sit and to be with God? And the other one is, what does it really mean to be loved by God? And those are 2 deep questions that go to our core.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that sometimes these people are veterans, deeply experienced, even in the context that they serve in. So we're not necessarily dealing with a language barrier here or a cultural barrier. They're familiar already, and that they may be trained as well. They might have even advanced degrees. And so this is something that can affect, can I say, could be applicable to any mission worker serving in any context, Mike?
I believe so, yes.
Mm-hmm. Did you personally wrestle with these kind of questions when you were serving on the field?
I did, but I don't know if I recognized that I wrestled with those until time went on. I feel like as a church planner that, if I could say, you get good at ministry, you get good at knowing how to do certain things, and I think that relationship can just so easily kind of fade. And it was really through going through some pretty difficult times, some maybe even I would call some crises, inner crises, that I realized that after all these years, that something had kind of been, I don't want to say lost is maybe a strong word, but something had been kind of neglected or not cared for in that way. And I began to realize more and more my longing for something deeper with God. And if I could add, and that kind of, it did lead me to a crisis, and I'd get together with other other missionaries, and we planned to talk about something personal, something deeper, and it just seemed like very quickly we'd be talking about strategy and our church plants and that type of thing. And for me, that became a deep question: is that all we are? Is what we do? And that was a difficult question for me to wrestle with. And I think out of that led to the ministry that I do now.
Mm-hmm. Well, led to a place where you can help others. 2 Corinthians 1 comes to mind, that our experiences are brought forward. But thanks for sharing some from your experience. And for our audience, too, especially, many of them will be serving in home churches, sending churches, Mike. This is something that may help sensitize them if there's any assumptions that because someone is serving in missions, that their soul care is in order. We shouldn't assume that. We need to be diligent, is what I'm hearing you say, I think.
Right. I think it's a common struggle for any of us as Christians. And so just getting on a plane and going overseas doesn't mean that we don't have those same struggles as anybody else.
Yeah, well spoken. You mentioned retreats in here. At some point, I'd like to ask you about retreats. What did it look like for you? Did you do retreats on the field personally, or is this something that you've more developed and participated in since being back in the U.S.?
Well, it's something that as I went through my training at North Park, I realized more and more that often we, as missionaries, we go to conferences, and they can be a little bit on the more informational side and not a lot of vulnerability. Again, I'm speaking in generalities. And so
Sure.
I thought, what would it be like to get just a few missionaries together at a time and to go off and spend some time and maybe just share some aspects of who God is and his love, and then give people maybe 2 hours to go off and to just be with God and to consider where they're at in that, and then come back together and to share out of that. And so I began doing that in the Czech Republic with a number of different missionaries or mission workers, and then expanded that. And then as I've come back to the States, I now travel and lead those kind of retreats. And sometimes it's with 3 or 4 mission workers, and sometimes it's with 50. So it's, yeah. But the goal is always to help people to slow down and to consider that the God that they serve, to take time to renew that deeper side that we long to be known and we long to know at a deeper level. And that's my hope, is to help others to do that.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. This is really good. Let's talk about the first concern you mentioned. Prayer is kind of the overarching idea, but you mentioned a difference between praying over a list or interceding for the list of requests or concerns we have and communion with God. Let's unpack these ideas a bit.
Yeah, and I don't want to at all minimize, the need for intercession and praying for ministries and praying for others. But there's a whole other side of us, I think, as believers that long for just that intimate relationship with the Lord, where we can share our deeper struggles. What we see in the book of Psalms of laments. A third of the Psalms are Psalms of lament. And that's where we see David or others just openly sharing their deep struggles and their hurts and their wounds with God without trying to make it look good. And those are all very relational. And sometimes I think that's hard for us to just be able to be open and honest with God and to sit and to listen to God and to just, what I could say is maybe just learn to be with God without feeling like we have to be doing something such as praying over a list or something, that we can just rest in who we are in him.
So if we realize we do need to rest in God's love, to use that expression, how can we learn to do that, Mike?
Yeah, Mags, that's a big question. If it was easy, I think we would all be there. So that's on many levels, and one of them I think is to slow down and take the time to be honest with ourselves. Is what's motivating us, what's going on inside of us. Am I able to rest in God's love? Am I able to abide, or do I feel like I have to be busy doing something? And often the things that can keep us doing that is sometimes just fear of what we'd find out if we slowed down. Sometimes it's the many distractions that we have, and sometimes it's even the ministry that we feel like we have to appease God because there's something that's missing. And I think for many of us, we have this sense that, and I think maybe especially for missionaries, we have this sense that God's disappointed that maybe if I would have been worked a little harder, if I would have done something else, that the ministry would flourish or more people would come to faith. And so we can carry this sense of disappointment, that God is disappointed in who we are. And with that sense of disappointment, I don't know about you, but I don't really enjoy being with somebody or rest in their presence if I feel they're disappointed in me. Mm-hmm. And so it's really coming to the place of honestly looking and openly looking and maybe having conversations with others about my own soul. What's motivating me? Why am I distracted? Why am I so busy? What's going on at those deeper levels? And to be able to just, learn to rest. We could talk for a long time, and most of us need actually a lot of help in this. It's not one thing that's going to help us. It's a long conversation with God and with others.
Well, when I think about the expectations that are on us, maybe this is particularly in the West, maybe not, but we talk a lot about productivity and, efficiency and outcomes. And again, like you said, I don't want to say that those things are bad, but if those become the only motivator and a constant motivator, I think our culture is pressing against this in some ways. I don't know if you agree. I'm wondering whether you're calling a stop here. Let's stop and reconsider some of those things and make sure that they stay in a healthy place.
Yeah, Mags, I definitely do agree with you that I think as missionaries or mission workers that we feel pressure and expectations from, I think, three big sources. One is our own. We have this idea of what missionaries are supposed to accomplish and do. We feel pressure from our sending churches, those people that are supporting us, that they're sacrificing to get us overseas. And so we can feel, not that they're necessarily saying this to us, but we feel just that inner expectation that we need to do something extraordinary or something big. And the other one is the national church that we're working with, that often we feel expectations to do what it takes to build credibility. And again, those are all important, that we build credibility and that we are having a vital ministry. But those expectations can drive us rather than God's Spirit. And so it comes back to learning to do Jesus's ministry, Jesus's way, instead of according to expectations and drive and trying to appease God and all those things that can work so deeply in us that we're not aware of. And to go back and say, am I doing Jesus's ministry really the way Jesus would have me to do it?
I'd like to draw back to the second of the points you made there, that sometimes the expectations of the sending church, because many of our listeners will be part of those sending churches. I think it's important to note that a mission worker will not always feel comfortable going to these levels with a sending church because of those expectations, especially if financial support is involved. In other words, if I come home from the field and I share that I'm not doing well in my soul care, those expectations of the church not being met, they may be reluctant to share some of that with the home church because they've sent us out and they're supporting us financially, and that will change and go away. It heaps on even more, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's one important reason for member care, or, this idea of soul care. I'm not a counselor, I offer more soul care, and it's really getting to those questions, a safe place where mission workers can share how they're really doing. It's like, I tell them, I don't really care about your ministry. Obviously I do, but it seemed like most people that would come over to see us when we were overseas, they wanted to see what we were doing. And that's wonderful. I loved showing all that off, but it wasn't very often that someone that was, if I could say, that was trained, or knew how to ask the questions that I felt safe answering. It wasn't very often that someone would come around and visit and just say, how are you doing? How was it with your soul? With some training and understanding of how to help me to go deeper into those questions.
So, Mike, you have written a blog post that brings together a few key ideas here. You have several points there. And by the way, we will include the link to that podcast or that blog post, the written format of this, in the show notes. But Mike, take us to some of those key ideas, please. How we can learn to rest in God's love. What are some of the key ideas?
Yeah, Max. Well, I already mentioned that. Remember that your ministry belongs to Jesus, and yeah, that's one to keep in the back of our mind. Is that this isn't our ministry that I have to make happen, but this is Jesus' ministry. And so, if I can lean into the reality that this is Jesus' calling, and He's not going to call me to kind of sacrifice my own soul, my own relationship with Him for what He wants me to do, and so. Yeah, so that first one is really to just remember that our ministry belongs to Jesus. And so is this the way I'm doing it, is this the way Jesus would have me to do it? To ask that question. Are we doing it His way?
I wonder, when you think about the missions committee or the sending church, are there ways that we could help brighten that truth?
Yeah, I think very much so, in that, again, somebody shares their vision, their desire of what they want to do, and very quickly it's easy to applaud or to, especially if the numbers are there, to applaud that and to give the pat on the back. But there's a time to come alongside and say, hey, it seems like maybe you're doing an awful lot here. Is there a sense that maybe you're doing more than what Jesus would have you to do? Is there maybe you need to be less busy? Do you need to say no? And to come alongside and ask the mission worker, are you doing not only Jesus' ministry, but are you doing it the way Jesus would have you to do it? Are you doing it His way?
And it implies a significant level of trust and relationship too, which is something that needs to be cultivated.
Yeah, exactly. Because actually those that suffer are the closest relationships to the mission worker. So if it's the husband that's out there church planting and doing a lot of things, and the wife is being neglected and the kids aren't having their dad around, then those are all things to look for, instead of just, is there success in ministry? Maybe we need to redefine a little bit of what success in ministry is. It's not just getting the things done, but it's leaning into a flow of life with God and relationship with Him, and out of that there's flowing ministry.
Mm-hmm. So the first major idea is to make sure that we remember that our ministry belongs to Jesus. What's the second major theme that you bring out, Mike?
The whole idea of that let doing flow out of being. And it seems like that really requires us to live into grace. I learned at Bible college that God's grace is His unmerited favor towards me. And, I knew that in my head. But the whole idea of living in grace, that means I can relax with God, and that I need to care for this whole side of what does it mean for me to be, to abide. Jesus told His disciples to abide in His love. And so that takes a lot of, if we were to look at our soul as a garden, that takes some cultivation. For true life to happen in a garden, it needs to be cultivated. It needs to be worked. The soil needs to be tended to, and the life there needs to be cultivated. And I think our souls are similar, and that being happens as we're able to, like we've already talked about, rest in love, as we're able to walk with God and communicate with Him, is almost to picture walking with the gardener, and in a life-giving place, and as we learn to be with Him and to rest in Him and to find our identity in Him and to let our roots go deep into His grace, then that doing that comes out of that, it comes from a different place than performance and productivity. Mm-hmm. And it may mean that we do less instead of more. I mean, it means that we can ask the hard questions without becoming defensive about our ministries. And that's hard to do.
Well, these are some helpful themes to consider. In a moment, Mike is going to suggest some further ideas about resting in God's love, and will include mentioning a key moment in his own life and ministry. Before we get to that, though, we'd like to share with you this missions resource that we hope will be helpful to you and your church.
Is there a role for me on the mission field? Can I really raise my own support? How will my kids handle culture shock? If you're wrestling with these or similar questions, Teams experts can help you find answers. Discover missionary roles that fit your passions. Create a plan that works with your family's needs, and get top-notch coaching to raise support. Connect with a Team Missions Coach today at team.org/missionscoach. That's team.org/missionscoach. And now, back to today's conversation.
Okay, we're back with Mike Bowden, who has described so far a couple of aspects of resting in God's love, making sure that we remember that our ministries belong to Jesus, and focusing on being with God as opposed to only doing for God. Mike, what's another aspect of resting in God's love?
Yeah, well, maybe just before I answer that, Mags, I'll just illustrate that with something for my own life. Is that I remember years ago back in the Czech Republic, I was doing some things that I thought they were all really good things. And I went for a date with my wife, and we were out for a walk, and she stopped and she said, "Mike, I didn't come all the way to the Czech Republic to save the Czechs and to lose our family."
Mm.
And that was a hard one for me to receive from my wife. But I began to realize I was just doing way too much, and they were all good things. And it's hard to know, how do you stop doing good things? And so it was hard to hear that from my wife, but I appreciate her saying that to me. Yeah, and I think the same thing is true. I was not only potentially going to lose my family, but I think in a way, if I could almost say, losing my own soul, and that there was so much hurriedness in my soul that, again, I'm thankful for the many ways the Lord was using me, but my soul had become so hurried that I was losing the ability to pay attention, to be aware, to rest in God, to pray, to do the things that I'm talking about now. So on to another key idea is the whole idea of developing true community.
Okay.
It seems like true Christian community is one of the greatest treasures of the Christian life. And yet it seems like many of us have just not really experienced that in deeper ways. And, Larry Crabb has a book on Christian community, and he talks about the counterfeit to Christian community is what he calls congenial relationships, where as long as we have a goal and we're all working towards that goal, and, the enemy is anything that gets in the way of that goal, that he calls those are congenial relationships. But what's missing is that deeper side of vulnerability and transparency and sharing our lives on a deeper level. And so the invitation is to develop a deeper sense of not just goal-oriented teams, but also teams and community where there's a sense of vulnerability and transparency, and that takes good leadership.
Mm-hmm. What is another aspect of resting in God's love, Mike?
Another one, which I've talked about grace already, but the idea of living grace, don't just proclaim it. And, Paul talked about this to the Galatians. He says, "You are running a good race. Who cut in on you?" And what had happened is they had started with grace and they returned to the law. And it seems like when we're deeply living into grace and not just proclaiming it, which, as evangelicals, that's what we are, evangelicalism, it's about proclaiming. And so we get good at proclaiming, but it's the whole side of living into that deep side of grace. And when there's that deep living into grace, it allows for expressions of healthy emotions. Instead of having to hide my emotions, instead of hiding my struggles, I can express my emotions in healthy ways, that I can share my deepest thoughts and concerns without fear of being judged. And it also grace gives the courage to face, our deepest areas of sin. And again, instead of managing our sin, we're able to really look into what's really hindering my relationship with the Lord. And I think grace also allows for differences in ministry styles. And so I think many of us have experienced being in ministry where there's not that grace. And so there's this kind of pressure to do ministry for us all to be the same. And actually, that's a beautiful expression of the body of Christ when we're able to have the grace to allow each person to serve God and to walk with God in their uniqueness.
Well, Mike, I think a lot of these ideas are going to resonate with our audience, and particularly those who would like to help take care of mission workers. Sometimes this will take place when these workers come on home service, if we can lift our sensitivity to these matters so that when they come home, we can bless them. Perhaps some of it will take place when they're actually still overseas. I wonder if you could imagine sitting with a missions committee and they do want to help with the soul care of their workers. What advice would you have for them?
Yeah, maybe, one part would be to listen well. I think sometimes it's hard to allow mission workers to be in a hard place. And mission workers are really good at knowing when there's expectations. I call it the missionary pedestal. And just by saying, "Wow, you're our heroes. You're the frontline workers," just a little comment like that, the missionary goes up on the pedestal, and he's gonna start saying all the right things. And so it's really coming alongside and listening well, asking soul questions, but also realizing that they may not answer those questions. The mission worker may not answer those questions if they aren't yet convinced that it's a safe place.
Creating a safe place when they come home. And I wonder, Mike, maybe if you would just describe for us, having been on this journey and being where you're at now, we're all learning and growing. What does resting in God's love look like in your life now?
Well, Mags, I think, that's been a long journey for me. And I think it's, mostly it's God at work in my life. But for me, it's meant taking more time for solitude. It's meant slowing down. It's meant, actually it meant for me, it was, we went to Link Care out in California and spent some time dealing with a lot of my own wounds, my own stuff in my life that was causing me, my own insecurities, that was causing me to perform and to feel that need to constantly do that. And so, so it's been a journey, but it's really, for me, it's meant slowing down, taking time, and coming to those deeper understandings, reading books on what it means to be loved by God, books in those areas, and going through a lot of my studies at North Park were in the area of spiritual formation. And so it's been a number of things, but it's maybe in some ways kind of being willing to crack open my soul and to be honest about what's working, even some of the things from my own culture, evangelical culture, that really weren't working, and not to have to feel like I had to pretend that they were.
Thank you for sharing from your own experience. It engenders more sharing and a healthy culture for a church or for an agency. It'll be clear to our audience that Mike has a lot of experience now with this, and he has actually compiled a list of resources for us. We will include that in the show notes. But Mike, I wonder whether you would mention a resource or two that really comes to mind, having had this conversation today, that might be helpful to our listeners.
Yeah, I think one on that list is Invitation to a Journey by Robert Mulholland. And maybe if I could mention another one that's on the list, it's a book called Trauma and Resilience, Effectively Supporting Those Who Serve God. And there's some excellent questions and postures of how to sit with a mission worker who's maybe struggling. And the reality is that many people that have served overseas have encountered some area of trauma in their life. And so I think it's just an excellent book to maybe bring those things to light of what often mission workers go through. And so, the book Trauma and Resilience, Effectively Supporting Those Who Serve God by Schaefer and Schaefer.
Okay. Well, there are a couple of highlights from the list. We'll include the rest in the show notes. Sometimes our listeners would like to follow up with our guests. Mike, if any would like to contact you and ask you further about this, how can they reach out to you?
Yeah, I'd be more than glad to get an email. My email address is mike.bowden, Bowden, @team.org.
Super. Well, we'll put that in the show notes as well. And if you'd like to follow up with Mike, there is that opportunity. Mike, thanks for spending this time with us today to help unpack this really important element of health for our workers. I hope it has helped our audience, those of you listening, to just realize again that these workers are not to be on a pedestal, as Mike said, but they have souls that really need care, and that the sending church, our communities that send them out, can be a healthy part of setting expectations and even blessing these workers as they serve and as they process their own soul care. Mike, thank you for joining us today.
Mags, it's been a pleasure, and may we all grow and rest in the love of God.
Amen. Thank you, Mike, for a heartfelt encouragement to all of us to rest in the love of our Creator. Let's each of us seek to apply these ideas in our own lives and as we care for our mission workers. Remember, you can find show notes for today's episode at globalmissionspodcast.com, including the list of resources that Mike mentioned today. He just spoke of a couple of highlights. The rest of the list is there in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd sure appreciate a review on iTunes, and we invite you to subscribe to this program in your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. As our regular listeners know, we're always glad to hear from you with suggested topics or interviews you'd like us to consider. This episode is brought to you by the Global Missions Toolbox and produced by Send International and the Jaffrey Center for Global Initiatives in collaboration with other like-minded agencies. On behalf of our team, thanks for listening. Join us again in 2 weeks when we'll continue to explore this grand adventure of being Christ's witnesses to the ends of the earth.